There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and this is a Zoom discussion with my bookish bestie, Ericka, joining us from Louisiana. We're here to talk about a fabulous queer novel from 1995, Now and Then by William Corlett. Hello, Ericka.
Hey, Shawn. So happy to talk to you and everybody.
I should give a little bit of the backstory for people that didn't hear it on other videos. This was a novel that I read shortly after it came out. I think the paperback edition is 1997, and I have now reread my copy of it. But I started feeling nostalgic for this book when I lived in Tokyo and bought a second copy to reread. Never got around to rereading it. Came back to Canada, and now I had two copies. Found out that my friend Ericka has a boarding school lit addiction, so I sent her the extra copy, and now we have both read it, and here we are to chat about it. So often in my Zoom discussions about novels, I divide the chat up into a non-spoiler section, which is the majority of the video, and then get into spoiler territory with a spoiler wall that you're amply warned about at the end. However, Ericka and I aren't planning to get into any spoilers whatsoever, so you can watch the entire video, and I'm giving you a 100% guarantee that there are no spoilers in this discussion. Get us started, Ericka. What did you think about this book?
I loved it, and I think it's relatable to I would think a lot of different people. You don't have to have gone to boarding school to understand what the characters are going through. You don't have to be a young gay boy to understand what the characters are going through. It has a lot of, I think, universal adolescent angst and problems that, I mean, it really spoke to me in certain parts. Very well done in the nuanced detail of all the trauma of that time in your life. So.
I remembered loving it, and then I loved it, I think, even more at this stage of my life. I read it when I would have been in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and now I'm considerably older than that, and so I read a different book this time.
Yeah. I love it when that happens. That's the best.
Yeah, it was a very satisfying, emotionally powerful reread for me. Yes, I think there's a lot of stuff that's really universal, and it's one of the best novels I've ever read about gay desire, same-sex desire, and about shame and guilt and secrecy and all of those things. Those themes can emerge in anybody's sex life, particularly when you are not of age. So yes, there's a broad universal appeal. I felt that the scenes describing the erotic longings between these two boys. Our narrator is maybe around 14 when the events from 30 years ago are occurring, and he gets into a love affair with Stephen, who is a couple of years older. And it was pretty much the first same-sex experience or sexual experience for either one of them, and I felt that the description of what that was like emotionally and sexually was so incredibly tender and searing that there were times where I had to set the book down and just kind of catch my breath. Really powerfully described. So I'll give a little bit of the premise, and if I make any mistakes, Ericka, please correct me. It's split into two timelines. There's a now timeline, which is set probably in the early 1990s, something like that. And then there's a then, which is when these boys were, like I say, about 14 and maybe 16 at their boarding school somewhere in the UK. And interestingly, one of the smaller elements, but which I didn't remember and I thought quite affected the sociological aspect of this novel, was that this school called Blandford's, they were really hoping to get Prince Charles to come as a student. And so there was a lot of things that they wanted in terms of how they chose to handle or suppress scandal, because they didn't want to lessen their chances to nab Prince Charles to attend. And that was an interesting aspect of it too. The school play is the Doll's House, Ibsen's Doll's House. And our protagonist, yes, absolutely. And our 14-year-old protagonist, Kit, or Christopher, has the main role of Nora. So there's all kinds of dramatic role playing or things around gender. And I forget which character Stephen is playing, but they have a lot of scenes together. I think he's the other man, isn't he? Maybe he's the other man in the story of The Doll's House. And so that's how they get together, is they're practicing lines, and then one thing leads to another. They're on again, off again. Romance and sexual relationship is really the theme of the rest of the novel. So that's what's happening back then. And now Christopher is a publisher, bachelor, who is emotionally and sexually frigid, and have been ever since he had his heart broken back at school. And there's references to something that happened where he had to leave the school because something happened to him that it doesn't get revealed until later in the book. His father has died. His mother is kind of happy about that and wants to be closer to her son. And he's kind of he's not out to anybody in his world, not even his best friend, who is her life. We find out later, it's not a spoiler. We find out later that his best friend is actually loves gay men and has them all, has a whole bunch of them in her life, and he doesn't find that out until much later. But he is starting to remember what happened 30 years before. So that's how I would describe the opening premise. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that you captured it.
You are an aficionado of boarding school novels. So
I am.
Why don't we start with that? What was particularly well done comparing it to other books you've read, or the boarding school aspect?
I found it interesting that there was a little bit of interaction with faculty. It seems to me like boarding school lit can either incorporate like the boys' home life and like the trouble they have with their parents or siblings into the narrative a lot, or it's completely ignored. And in this book, it was pretty much ignored. I thought like it wasn't a focus. Kit didn't really have a whole lot of, I guess, impressions about his family leaking through into his. It was like totally separate to be a boarding school. It's like a totally different life. And it seems like a lot of other books too. They're like a boy will be infatuated with a professor, or there's a scandal with the professor or something. And there was a teacher in this book used very effectively, I thought, but it really wasn't a central focus. So that was kind of good. It was really just about Kit and Stephen. It was very boy focused. So
yes, and I would add to that, because that's exactly right. And we really got a sense of the culture of, they didn't use these words, I forget the words they used, but like seniors and juniors, and the pecking order, the hierarchy,
the prefect or whatever brutal. It was.
Yes, prefect. It was brutal. There was a lot of violence,
a lot of hazing, a lot of permitted bullying, encouraged bullying. And if you weren't bullying a younger boy, it was like, what's wrong with you? We need to pull you aside and be like, hey, you were too easy on that kid. It's creepy. Stephen is a prefect. He's the older boy, and Kit, or Christopher, he's way down on the pecking order. And so that dynamic, the conflict there plays itself out in really intense ways, shall we say. There's one thing that didn't ring true for me, or I'm still trying to puzzle over. So I'd like to get your feedback on that. And this is not a spoiler. This happens fairly early in the story. But a ways into Kit and Stephen's relationship, like Kit's best friend, whose name is what? Nigel. Yeah.
Nigel? Nigel suspects that something's going on. He kind of sees them together and he puts two and two together. And he confronts Christopher. And Christopher's response, it was the only thing that I thought, was that a bit of a false note? Because Christopher, again, two 14-year-olds talking about being bum boys or the same-sex relationships that boarding schools are notorious for. But Christopher didn't deny it. Instead, he kind of got on a soapbox and confronted Nigel about it. And to me, that didn't fit.
Yeah.
Did you have a problem with that, or?
I thought it was a little bit too insightful for a 14-year-old boy struggling with his sexual identity, and also for the time. And considering that a big theme of the book is like self-loathing and self-denial.
Shame and secrecy.
Yes. that you would think he would say, "Oh no, I'm not like that. No, and then maybe pick on another kid about it to try to deflect attention or something,
Yes.
which is what
Yes,
you'd
yes, yes.
expect. I wouldn't expect this view coming from this boy in this time, in this situation. So yeah, you're right.
Bit of a false note there. Didn't fit with all the other fear of being discovered and stuff. One scene in an otherwise just fantastic novel that didn't hit me quite right.
Mhm.
So William Corlett is dead now. He died in 2005. He was 66. And he was primarily known as a children's writer. There's a quartet of novels called The Magician's House.
Oh
that
yeah,
he's
look
most
that up.
known.
Yeah.
Do you know? Well, yeah.
No.
No. But then he wrote this. So he kind of came out when he wrote this novel because everything else was children's stuff and not gay. And then one more novel, Two Gentlemen Sharing. It makes me think that this was probably. I mean, it doesn't matter, or does it? Maybe that's a question to discuss. Does it matter whether this is autobiographical? It certainly read to me like this.
Yeah,
This was based on
it
what
doesn't
little I.
matter. But if it isn't, I'd be surprised just because it was so insightful. I don't know how you can write the kind of scenes and describe the kind of emotions that Kit had without this personal experience. I don't know, which is why I was so amazed that I kept writing notes like, "Oh, I felt the exact same way," So it's amazing how universal this was to me.
It just had such a deep ring of emotional truth.
Mhm.
We're not sure whether we need to talk about this behind the spoiler wall, but before the spoiler wall goes up, I should say, give a bit of a content warning that there is a scene of sexual assault. So that's if that is something that you don't want to read about, consider yourself warned. Other than the two main characters,
Mhm.
Christopher and Stephen, who was your favorite character?
My
Secondary
favorite
character.
I mean, of course, his best friend. She was a hoot. I loved her.
Catherine?
Yeah, she was wonderful. But I think as far as impactfulness, if that's a word, the drama teacher that puts on the play TG. Kit goes back later to visit TG and thinking that as an adult, like talking to him when he's an adult to another adult, that TG will be different or approach what happened at school with some pathos and compassion, and he doesn't. And I just, that was really hard to read.
It was a very difficult scene.
PG was the same as he was when Kit was 14, and he was also still kind of bossing him around and teaching him treating him like a student, even though he's now a grown man and going back to discuss something very sensitive. It was a letdown for Kit and disappointing. But I think it was so true and heart-wrenching. So I really liked that character that he brought him back later in the book.
And I think he was the voice of so much of the social views of that time, not just in the UK. He was espousing kind of a homophobic jokiness about the whole thing that
Right.
ended up just turning the knife in the wound.
Yeah. He was just really blasé about the whole trauma that Kit went through and like, oh yeah, that was silly. It's like, no, it really wasn't. It messed with his entire life and nobody took it seriously. And so TG is sort of the embodiment of that, about how nobody took this kind of, soul crushing experience seriously except for Kit. So yeah. So I'll go with TG on that one.
I was interested in all the characters, and I liked the fact that none of them were especially likable in the sense that, like his mother, she was a piece of work, and I really liked her. I liked how much I didn't like Christopher's sister. She was full-bodied and really annoying at every age that we see her in the story.
Totally boy crazy. Yeah.
There's some very moving scenes that we're not going to talk about in detail near the end of the novel between Christopher and his mother. But I already loved her and then loved her even more. But she was quirky. She was in a loveless, unhappy marriage for decades and then wanted to let her hair down. And it took a little longer for her bachelor son to join her there, where she was.
That was cool. Yeah. I appreciated the fact that, the big question, I mean, did Stephen love Kit? That's really the big question throughout the whole book. Because I mean, Kit was obviously obsessed with him, but did Stephen, was it mutual? And Stephen was so on again, off again, obsessed with Kit. And then, what the hell are you doing? Get away from me, little boy. I felt like that was also true to form when you have this kind of shame in the relationship, but Stephen wasn't very nice. And so did he love Kit or not?
I might tweak that just a bit for my impression of it is that he wasn't always nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I agree completely that the question of whether or not he loves Kit or Christopher, I keep using both names, but the reason I'm doing that is because Stephen was the only one who called Christopher Kit. So I got both names in my head. Everybody else throughout his life has called him Christopher. That is a fundamental question that animates the entire story in the now sections and the then sections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just don't know. I mean, if he did, is it just all the Stephen couldn't come to terms with having a relationship like that? Or was he immature and just couldn't handle the kind of love he was feeling at that time in that age? Or was he afraid to break convention and was like, no, I'm supposed to graduate and marry a girl and have this life and have kids and I can't be with kids? I don't know.
I think that, reading it as a gay man, it just rang so heartbreakingly true that the way he would bounce back and forth between those two poles of being emotionally open and all lovey-dovey to just being partially rejecting of
It was very extreme. Yeah, and so then Kit was going to get, and that was sad. He just kept setting himself up over and over again.
One of the things that I thought was the most nuanced was the characterization of Stephen, because we don't really get a handle on him. Maybe some readers would feel they have a handle on who Stephen is by the end of the novel, and that's into spoiler territory, but certainly through the then sections when he's a young boy or a young man, I felt he was slippery and hard to pin down and hard to really get a handle on, but I thought that was perfect for the story because we're seeing him through Kit's eyes, and Kit can't get a handle on him. So the fact that he didn't really emerge in a complete way for us was, I think, crucial to the story working the way it did. I thought it was really quite well done.
Very well done. I have a question for you, and this might be in reverse. I don't know, my screen's weird. Have you read The House, Martin?
Who's the author?
Trying to make it not blurry. William Parker?
I have not, but yet the title is vaguely familiar.
I kept thinking of this book when I was reading. It has a similar kind of quiet sadness to it, and it is a boarding school book, so it might be something that interests you. But with the boarding school thing, it is halfway about a faculty member, so there is that, but it's really sad. It's really, really sad. The whole book is depressing, but I love that. So love a depressing story. So yeah.
Love a depressing boarding school stories. I wonder if there's any happy boarding school stories.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Harry Potter. That's about the only one that comes to mind. Yeah. And another one was a book called While England Sleeps.
David Leavitt. I haven't read that one, but it's famous.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. Loved it. Very sad. Yeah.
Another thing that we can talk about obliquely, I'm not sure we need to go into behind the spoiler wall. I think, maybe it's not necessary. But so another thing that we can talk about obliquely is the fact that Christopher finds out. How do I say it obliquely? Christopher finds out that people were interested in him and drawn to him, and he had his self-regard was so non-existent. I mean, he was so full of self-loathing that he was not aware of what was going on. And so we get some stuff at the end of the novel that we're not going to get into, but I also thought that added another layer of nuance to the entire novel.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I didn't see him that way. I saw him as this little quiet twerp of a kid that everybody was kind of like, go away, he's a drip or whatever. But in fact, he was kind of man about campus, and everybody kind of liked him. And who knew? Yeah. So.
And I relate to that actually quite a bit. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting thing. And again, very obliquely, I thought the actual ending where he writes a letter, and we're not going to say who it is to, was such a powerful ending. I almost got all verklempt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Very.
flows out of what we were just talking about.
Yeah. Really good
Saw him
ending.
in a way. Really good ending. What do you think? Are we done?
Yeah. Everybody should read it. Everybody read this book. It's very very
it's
tender.
one of my favorite gay novels.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad I reread it. I think I'll probably reread it again in about 10 years, and I'll probably hook you up for a buddy reread, Eric.
Yeah, you should do that. That would be good.
It was so great to have a pseudo buddy read with you of this. And let's do another one, Ericka.
Yes, absolutely. This was fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn.